Defense attorneys of Reddit. What is the most messed up case you have ever taken? Story 1. This happened while I was still an intern. We had a client that had been accused and arrested for assaulting his 6-month-old daughter. He was innocent. Most of our case was focused on the testimony and examinations done by 3 expert witnesses, a psychiatrist and 2 pediatricians, all 3 specialized in treating infant assault victims. I helped assist them in writing their reports and testimonies, since they have to be both highly technical and understandable to an educated but unspecialized reader. I basically had to spend 2 days going over pictures of assaulted baby evidence with them. We won. We proved the baby was not assaulted by a male but by fingers with long nails. The nanny had done it. Interesting comment. 1. I'm an addictions counselor. In 8 years, I have dealt with 5 persons that have intimate interference or assault on a minor charges that the minor is under 6 years old. And those are only the ones the court lets me see. So it is a bit terrifying how many people out there do messed up things. Comment 2. My sister is doing a practicum as her last semester before she graduated university. Her practicum is rehabilitation programs with low-functioning intimate offenders. They are making her go through preparations before she starts next month to make sure she can handle what she will be hearing. She also had to go through a full debrief as a part of her workday to make sure she is okay and able to make it home. Not the job or the practicum I'd be accepting, that's for sure. Comment 3. She needs to be very careful. No revealing clothing. If she is large-chested, she needs large sweaters that do not hug curves. No skirts period. No tight pants, no flashy shoes, no heels of any height, flats only, neutral colors. Nothing that complements her eyes, no flashy hairstyle, no earrings. If she is married, she should get a fake ring from Walmart that is not flashy or expensive. If she is not married, she should get an ugly ring from Walmart and wear it. Little to no makeup, no chains or necklaces ever, no nose rings, no exposed tattoos. She should always wear longer socks, no ankle socks. The type of offenders that wind up in those programs are the type that can get aroused by anything really, and then the counseling is null and void. They do not pay attention. She is probably versed on this stuff already, as there is much more to it. But really, I am a guy, and when I worked with the male low-functioning population of intimate offenders, they would still try to make inappropriate advances toward me. Tell her to protect herself and remind her that it is a great learning experience. Comment 4. Unfortunately, yes, it is terrible. But thankfully, there are opportunities available for those people strong enough to want to specialize in it. I wouldn't say I want to specialize in something like that awful subject, but I am going to become an intimate assault nurse examiner, focusing in pediatrics, in order to bring some hope and reassurance to the children who had to go through such a terrible experience. That's why we do it. Story 2. Worked a civil case and found a medical record where the wife was in the error because her husband pointed a weapon to her head and made her harm herself with green yarn. He got 3 years. Most messed up part is that they were still together. Edit. I have all kinds of stories like this. It is amazing what kind of things people are capable of and how it will haunt them later in life. Story 3. I was a paralegal for a little while, and I worked on a case of an 11-year-old Amish girl that was pregnant by her own brother. She had to keep the baby, which was stillborn. She wasn't even removed from the home. Comment 1. Beach bum. 10 years agothe. Amish are difficult people. Truthfully, I have never encountered a more rude and selfish group of people in my entire life. Sure, there are some nice ones, but those are just the ones that interact enough with you to sell you something at a farmer's market. They don't pay taxes, and yet still drive on the roads which their carriage tires ruin at a faster rate. Many of their children and members have been harmed driving on the roads by cars. Because they drive their carriages in the middle of the street with no lights, and occasionally you will see a small strip of reflection tape or a yellow triangle. I remember in my area something like 3 kids were harmed in a year span. So logically, the government tells them, if you want to drive on the roads, you need to have some way to increase visibility. They fought this harshly, stating that it goes against their religion. I mean, what the heck? Your kids and members are getting hurt because nobody can see you driving. We have a solution, but you say no. Also, they are the worst to work with in business. I have a few friends who have families that own farms or a farmer's market. A few of them flat out refuse to do business with Amish people unless they personally know them, their community, and their family, and like them. You will arrange a transaction, X amount of feed for X amount of money. So you go to your barn, go through the process of getting the amount of feed ordered, package it up, and have it ready for the Amish farmer. That amount of feed is not exactly easy to gather up and requires some work. However, you do it on short notice because it's a large order. Then the Amish farmer shows up, attempts to barter the already discounted wholesale price down from what you agreed to on the phone. They have phones in their barns. This isn't a small barter like taking 5% off or giving $450 instead of $500. They literally will try to talk you down to almost 50% of what you asked them. Most of the time, if you refuse to sell to them at 50% of what you agreed to, they will just leave. So there you are, with the product you put time in getting ready for sale, with no sale. Not only did you waste your time prepping the sale, but you now have to reverse the entire process, all for nothing. Then Rumspringa comes around, and you have little jerks of children running around at night on country roads wearing black pants and a gray t-shirt, intoxicated, defacing homes in the area, harming livestock, or destroying cornfields for parties. They are truly not great people. I understand their customs and cultures are different, and their social norms are different. I accept that. However, when the social norms of your society result in you being a complete jerk to me and my social norms, I have a very hard time liking you. It's not some form of racism. It's just that most interactions with Amish people are not enjoyable ones. Comment 2. I agree. I had quite a few interactions with Amish or Hutterite, which is similar, for what I understand, people over the past decade. First working at a grocery store, then at a hospital, my first interaction. The head man of the family demanded 400 boxes of Lucky Charms from me. I explained that we had plenty on the shelf, and took him to where we had 100 at least. No, this grown man, at least 50 years old, stomped his feet and called me an idiot, saying that he needs more, screaming at the top of his lungs. I was young and scared for my job, and he made such a scene, so I went back and found a fresh pallet of Lucky Charms that happened to have just been delivered. All in total, there were 320 boxes on the pallet or something. Add the 100 we had out, and there's 400. So I brought it out for him and told him that when he paid I could help him bring it outside on the pallet jack, but he'd have to load up the rest in a couple of carts and pay before it went outside. He said, "I don't do labor," and stood there. I was at my breaking point, so said, "Okay then, have a nice day," and started taking the big pallet back inside. He shouted, "Stop, then wait here," like I was some dog. A minute later he returned with 5 women and 3 carts. He made them load up while he just stood there rifling through his bag, counting his cash. He then calculated the price of the order and began to haggle with me. He wanted them for 50% off. I can't lower the price. He kept going, eventually saying, 75%, I pay not any more. So I said, "Fine, I guess you don't," and again began to leave with the pallet. Same stop or wait commands issued, followed by "throw in the pallet jack and you have a deal," while holding out his hand for a shake. This time I left with the pallet for good. He screamed and cursed, but I just slowly walked off. When I came back, they'd left the nearly full carts and knocked the rest of the cereal and neighboring items to the ground. Darn, from then on I do my best to ignore them, going too far as to walk away when they called for me and pretending that I couldn't hear them. If they asked me for bulk amounts of items, I'd go check in the back and play Tetris on my flip phone for 15 minutes. Sometimes another employee would walk in to fill the same request, and I'd have them join me. They were also the #1 demographic for stealing at both the grocery store and the hospital. They'd steal the darn 1-ply toilet paper in washrooms. They'd drain the soap dispensers into Ziploc bags. We had a linen room with sheets and pillows in the The door was only locked when Amish or Hutterite came in, because they'd take everything. It was unbelievable. They're a bunch of filthy barbarians. Comment 3. Everything is owned collectively. This becomes a problem once they are in whatever town they live near, as they think nothing of just grabbing whatever they want without the intention to pay. I cannot tell you how many times I watched someone shadow a group of Hutterites in Walmart, because they'd pocket anything that wasn't tied down. Comment for this. This is exactly what I am talking about. I have had people tell me, that's not a big deal, when you talk about them trying to haggle, and you eventually don't sell them the product. But the fact is, it is a big deal because it ends up costing the seller time and money. Your situation was cereal. Not that hard of a product to prepare, but look at the time this interaction took. Time you could have been spending making money for the store. Now think about how much of an impact that is when talking about a truck and trailer loaded with hay for delivery. Each bale is not light. It takes labor to load up the truck. On top of that, it costs money and time to deliver the hay to the Amish, because they never seem to be able to pick up the product because they don't have a car, but their van is always ready to take them into town. So you drive over, after loading the bales of hay for 2 hours, to get this runaround and return back with the hay and unload it. You just loaded and unloaded an entire trailer and truck full of hay for $0. If you are working for someone, they just paid you to do nothing. They made no money. Comment 5 agreed on almost all of your points. I live in South Central Kentucky, and we have tons of Amish around here. I will say this, Amish here at least vary county by county. In my home county, the Amish are friendlier, cleaner, and just generally nicer than in a neighboring county, where they are literally as you describe above. And by cleaner, I literally mean hygiene. The ones in my hometown use deodorant and bathe regularly. The ones from Barron County, the county next door, you can smell coming from a mile away. Our Amish also use reflectors on their buggies. Barron County Amish don't. One thing I must note though, they do pay taxes, state and federal both in Kentucky. I know this 100% for a fact because my mother is an accountant, and she has many Amish clients. I grew up with Amish in our house every tax season, having their income taxes prepared. Their tires do ruin the roads faster though. Story 3. When I was at a law firm, I worked briefly on a case where we were defending a guy named Patrick. Patrick was an older teenager, I want to say 17, but I could be misremembering. Patrick was also mentally disabled, and had the IQ of something like an 8-year-old. So one day, Patrick and 4 or 5 of his buddies rob and harm a cab driver. All the buddies point the finger at Patrick. And I don't know, maybe he really was the trigger man, but it was just a sad situation. Patrick wound up getting 60 years for harm and armed robbery, so at least we kept him off of death row. Edited text. Part 5. Comment 1. Sometime last year a boy was shot and harmed in his front yard. The boy who did it was mentally disabled, and had been talked into doing it by his older friends. He flat out told the cops he did it when they finally found witnesses to point him out. 2 other guys were with him, one being the sheriff's son, so people finally came forward. He was sentenced for 30 years, I believe. The family of the boy he harmed begged the judge to not give him life. Said they lost their child for forever. This boy's family didn't deserve it. Other 2 boys didn't get a thing done to them, sadly. Story 4. At my office we mostly defend the victims of crimes. One time we had a case where a 14-year-old girl was assaulted by a family friend at a party with her parents and those friends. To make things even worse, she was pregnant instantly. When found out she was pregnant, she told the cops what happened, and the parents immediately did an abortion. Afterwards, the prosecutor ordered a DNA test on the fetus. To prove who did it, the criminal file had pics of petri dishes with parts of the fetus in it, like a little tiny hand. That is an image I will never forget. Story 5. About 3 years ago, I represented a man accused of molesting his 9-month-old daughter. He denied those charges, but during the course of the investigation he confessed that during his life he had assaulted his intoxicated mother multiple times, assaulted his younger brother and older sister multiple times, and, in the culminating event, had harmed the family dog, resulting in its death, the cause of death being confirmed by a vet. Story 6. This isn't gory or brutal, but something that stuck with me for a while after. I used to work at a litigation tech, mostly doing video editing and demonstrative graphics for mediation and trial. Most of my clients were construction liability, and some major companies that are still fighting asbestos cases. Anyway, we didn't see much criminal defense work. But I did work one case involving an accused child molester. He was a beloved middle school band teacher with a lovely wife and 2 adult children. He was accused of making 2 male students perform intimate acts on him on 2 separate occasions. This rocked the teacher's world, obviously. He lost his job and was publicly disgraced in the media. The case came to a trial. The prosecution's whole case was based on the student's testimony about the encounters, about the inappropriate acts this man made these children perform on him. Then the defense's key witness took the stand. He was the teacher's family doctor. Thus began a 20-minute presentation about how this poor man's anatomy was so compromised that it was actually non-functioning. Had to sit to urinate, couldn't have intimate relations even with medical assistance, etc. In front of the jury, the news, his children, wife, God, and everyone. He was basically humiliated to prove that he couldn't ever be a harmful deviant because he can't have intimate relations. The defense was, this dude's anatomy is so compromised that if you saw it, you would remember it. The anatomy the kids had described was a normal 5 inches, I think they said. This is where the case gets messed up, beyond the fact that this dude's private parts are now the lead story on the local news. His kids had no idea that they were actually adopted because it was impossible for their dad to have intimate relations. It was a strange day in the courthouse to see this family be rocked on so many emotional levels. Comment 1: This is the kind of thing that makes me want to support laws that stop press coverage of trials like this. Some random guy got humiliated on television, accused of horrible things, and it severely affected his family life. For what purpose? Because some idiot in some newsroom thought it was an interesting story. I think privacy for the accused, unless they're convicted, is more important than any freedom of press to broadcast a story like this. You also eliminate the terrible, he's guilty, execute him nonsense that modern media portrays accused, not convicted yet, people as, Story 7, the case where the defendant put the blame on his assault victim, saying that she had been intentionally driving him crazy by wearing her school-mandated uniform around him. She was 12 years old. Defendant was in his mid-30s. I felt extremely dirty after talking with him. The hardest thing I've ever had to do was call the elderly mother of one of the defendants I was working with. I was still in law school at the time, and tell her that in all likelihood she would never see her son outside of prison walls again. That one had me in tears. Story 7, the case where the defendant put the blame on his victim, saying that she had been intentionally driving him crazy by wearing her school-mandated uniform around him. She was 12 years old. The defendant was a man in his mid-30s. I felt extremely dirty after talking with him. The hardest thing I have ever had to do was call the elderly mother of one of the defendants I was working with while I was still in law school, and tell her that in all likelihood she would not see her son outside of prison walls again. That one had me in tears. Story 8, a man asked his child, who was 5 years old, to retrieve his gun. He then shot his wife 10 times. He reloaded twice, and the third clip he unloaded into her while she was deceased. His child was watching. Maybe not the most disturbing, but he was one of the first clients I ever met with, and he was just a creepy loser. Story 9, this was a case my office took and I sat in on. A young male assaulted his mother. Our office set up an insanity defense, but his mother fought hard during cross-examination to refute this. Our theory was she was in denial that her son was mentally ill and did not want to take responsibility for it, especially in front of her family. Edit. I just wanted to clarify some issues. This was a heinous case, no matter how you look at it. I worked at a public defender's office, and rarely were cases rejected unless there was a conflict of interest. So this is not one of those high-profile defense situations ethically, or at least I like to hope so. We raise defenses if they have merit. The insanity defense was raised based on statements from both parties and a psychiatric evaluation. Plus, there are a lot of details I have not mentioned. This was just a quick summary. The defendant was definitely not all there. This is not to belittle what happened to the victim on any level, but rather a comment on what a stigma raising someone with a mental illness can be. Story 10. I do not regularly do criminal law, but once one of the senior partners needed me to make an initial application for a client he was defending in criminal court, just a straightforward procedural matter. I did not meet the client until she arrived at the courthouse that morning. My instructions were to get her to sign a designation of counsel form, then make the application myself. It was summer, and I live in a place that gets pretty warm. This was first thing in the morning, so it was not that hot yet, but this was a day that got above 30 degrees Celsius. The client shows up, and I get her to sign the form. I then said, "This should not take too long. I got the clerk to pull your file to the front of the list, so we should be done quickly." She replied, "Oh good, because I have left my kids in the car." Doing my best to keep a straight face, I told her that I had everything I needed from her and that she could go. So off she went. A few minutes later, before the court was in session, the partner texted me to ask if I had got the form. I told him what happened, and only then did he inform me that the client was supposed to make an appearance. I ran to the parking lot, but she was long gone. Luckily, the judge did not seem to mind that she was not there, and I got the order I needed. When I got back to the office, I gave the order to the partner. He told me good job and jokingly added, "If we are lucky, she will retain us for the child endangerment charges too." Story 11. I worked as a paralegal on a case a few years ago where our client, a man in his 60s, was being accused of harming his underage relative, who was about 12 years old, and I believe was his brother's grandchild. Part of the evidence against him was an affidavit from his son and a friend of his son, saying he had harmed them when they were young, around age 10. Sadly, that is pretty normal stuff. The part that stuck with me was how his wife reacted to the whole thing. She was in complete denial. She would come into the office and rant about how her son was a liar, even though he was not, and how the girl was manipulative, despite her being 12 years old and much younger when the harm began. I ended up leaving before the case was ready for trial, and have no idea if he finally listened to the attorney and pleaded or not. Story 12. Anything with explicit child content is the worst. Not the 16-year-old variety, but the 4, 5, 6-year-old type. The descriptions are nauseating, but the worst part is viewing it. I will take death row harm cases over that any day of the week. Comment 1. I will never understand attraction to children. There are some weird things out there that turn people on. Feet, vomit, urine, and although it would not do it for me, whatever floats your boat, man. But being aroused by children is just, I cannot even comprehend it, and I know there are probably quite a few people with those urges out there that feel the same way, and it must be difficult to be them. Comment 2. There was a small thread about it a few months back, which I am having trouble finding. It was from a journalist who stumbled upon a guy in his late teens, whose identity she kept a secret, who identified as having an attraction to children. She writes about how he controlled his urges and was completely open to the idea of things like suicide and castration before acting on them. He even set up an anonymous support group online, which at its peak had, if I remember correctly, 20 or so active members. It really makes you think. Imagine being gay during the AIDS epidemic. It is not a choice. Now imagine being attracted to little kids. You are, by all standards, considered a monster, and there is nothing you can do about it. What really hit home is a story the kid told about when he could not handle what he was. He just gave his mom a note saying that he had to speak with a therapist and that he could not explain why. His mom then takes him to a therapist, and he explains his situation. The therapist becomes uncomfortable, tells him that she is not suited to speak with him, and goes on to relay the fact that he has those urges to his mother. It is all just really jarring. Disclaimer: this video contains references to self-harm. If you or someone you know is struggling, please contact a mental health professional or a crisis hotline for support. Story 13. When I was an intern, one of the things that sticks out in my mind as awful, besides going to an actual autopsy, the smell, yikes, was photos on a case that we had in the office. This kid was killed during a substance deal gone wrong. He was hit over the head, hogtied, stuffed into a plastic bag and buried. The killers then poured a concrete patio, over where he was buried. The pictures and video of the cops digging him out and of the autopsy were truly awful. This video does not promote illegal activity. It is shared for commentary. Story 14. I am an intern at a local public defender office. 1 year left of law school, but so far, my most disturbing client had kicked his dog to death in public. I actually had to research whether that constituted animal cruelty, and if there was any exception. Story 15. My grandfather's legendary story, the chicken incident. A cop rides along a road. He sees a car parked off to the side, rocking. He taps on the glass, thinking, it is probably just some kids. He finds a man engaging in inappropriate behavior with a chicken. The officer says, "What are you doing?" The man, under the influence of substances, says, "I am not even here right now." I cannot remember the rest of his story, but "I am not even here right now" is a running joke at family gatherings. Edit. All my grandfather said was, "I talked to the officer." He said, "I did not know what to do when I saw what was happening. Tell him to stop, or let him finish and see if the chicken was okay." The man was charged and convicted with animal cruelty and indecent exposure. Story 16. I overlooked a case where the defendant was at school and had taken 2 girls into the bathroom and forced them to undress and engage in inappropriate activity, culminating with him touching them inappropriately. I know this sounds fairly messed up, but here is the big twist. The kid was 4 years old. We said that he did not know what he was doing, but I had to think, what is wrong with this kid? Story 17. I am a legal assistant. The worst case was an old man who had a history of harming his younger family members. First, it was his daughter's friend. Years later, it was his granddaughter. During the investigation with the granddaughter, it came out that he had harmed his daughter from ages 10 to 16. He asked for a trial, even though he did not deny it. He said it was not as often as she claimed. What got me was the daughter, who was now a grown woman, was scared to testify as she thought her mom would hate her for it. Her mom would come to court every time with her husband and sit there and knit, like she was waiting for him at the dentist or something. I actually found a printout of the judgment from his first conviction for this and have it pinned up on the board at my office. I am convinced that Mr. Alex is not dangerous. He has a character as strong as the Rock of Gibraltar, quote from the judge. Meanwhile, he went home and continued to harm his daughter in secret. Story 18. I am a student working at a firm, and there was one disturbing case that was all over the news in the Greater Toronto area in Canada. The guy and his sister lived in the same house. Apparently, the sister had mental health issues, and one day she got enraged and came at her brother with a knife. The brother ended her life, and then tried to cover it up by dismembering her body and storing it in his freezer. He disposed of her remains bit by bit in the trash and tried to destroy evidence by boiling her remains. I think people only found out because of the unusual smell, and he said he would not have told anyone about it if nobody had found out. My boss and his clerk had to look through all the photo evidence and defend him. They got him a manslaughter charge. This video does not promote illegal activity. It is shared for commentary. Story 19. Here is a disturbing case my friend was involved in. My friend was locked in her room and assaulted repeatedly by her male nanny when she was 8 years old. Eventually, it was found out, but she had a somewhat unusual, highly religious father who really liked the nanny. The nanny expressed remorse, and the father forgave him. He used his status as her parent and guardian, along with his high-priced lawyers, to prevent her from being able to testify and convict the guy. She had to wait until she was 18 years old to finally convict the guy. Story 20. Defense attorneys can still do their jobs extremely well and hope that their client goes to prison. Defense attorney's job is not to get someone acquitted and sent home. It is to make sure that the state does their job correctly, to ensure they got the warrants before they searched someone, to ensure they did not pressure a confession unethically. By defending the guilty, a good attorney protects the innocent. Comment 1. The struggle people have with this is that the defense attorney is not going to say, yes, that confession sounds legitimate, even if they completely believe the confession is legitimate. They are going to distort the facts to try to make it sound illegitimate. That is not making sure the state does their job correctly. Source: I was on a jury trial where the lawyer had no evidence to prove a confession was illegitimate, so he had his client testify to a story about how the cops took him to a secluded area and pressured him to confess with no evidence. In fact, the prosecution had evidence contradicting it, including timestamps making it effectively impossible for that to have taken place. Did not matter. The lawyer knew he was lying, and that there would be no repercussions because his client told him that is what happened. It was also a lost cause case because, confession. Story 21. I am not a lawyer, but I was recently deposed for a case, and when I was talking about something one of the defendants did, his lawyer got this look on her face that was completely, he did what? Oh, what a jerk. It was kind of great, honestly. Comment 1. Additionally, my aunt was a labor lawyer for the government, doing mediation with the union over employees who filed grievances that they were wrongfully dismissed. A lot of these ex-employees definitely deserve to lose their jobs for things like inappropriate conduct or discrimination in the workplace. But I know she had a few cases where she did think that the person had actually been fired wrongfully, and she was hoping to lose. Comment 2. It is a case against a professor who assaulted a 19-year-old female student 15 years ago. Suing the professor and the university, it is this small detail, but before the assault, they were drinking tea, and the professor utterly refused to give the victim milk and sugar for said tea. It is basically a control tactic that abusers use to see whether a victim will stand up for themselves. It is worth noting that the lawyer was originally the university's insurance lawyer, not the professor's, but because of how the insurance carriage worked out, she is now representing both. So she is stuck with this difficult client she probably thinks is a jerk. But her job is to try to limit how much the university's insurance company has to pay in the settlement. Story 22. Yes. Because I thought she was exaggerating everything, making things up that were inconsistent, and trying to pull a scam. But we drop those kinds of clients. We do not represent people we do not believe. That is one of the good things about the office where I work. We do things by the book and as ethically as we can. Other offices might say, hey, we can work with these facts and get something out of the case. We do not do that if we think the client is a liar and trying to pull a fast one. Better to let the work we did so far go to waste than to have to deal with the state bar or a lawsuit against us later on. Story 23. I am not a lawyer, but I once heard about a lawyer who defended a client from the accusation of making counterfeit money, and the client paid them with counterfeit money. The lawyer was forced to testify against his own client. It was a funny story. Story 24. The defendant successfully convinced a psychiatrist that they were incompetent to proceed. The psychiatrist sends a report to the judge saying this person is incompetent. At this point, normally we would just have a cursory hearing where the judge agrees with the psychiatrist's findings, and that is that. Except in the meantime, after the psychiatrist's report but before the hearing, the defendant calls his girlfriend, yes, another recorded jail call where they know they are being recorded, and tells her all about how he fooled the psychiatrist, that the psychiatrist was such an idiot, the judge was an idiot, the lawyers were idiots, he had tricked us all, and so on. Safe to say, that otherwise cursory hearing did not go his way. Comment 1. I remember being a teen with Jordan, and going to a theater to try to buy tickets to an R-rated movie. It did not work out, but there was an older lady nearby, and we asked her to buy our tickets, and she did. The lady in the booth asked, "Do you know these boys?" And she said, "Yes, I am their aunt." Man, she was killing it. As I was going in, I shouted to her, "Lady, I do not know you, but you rock." I did not consider a number of things in doing this. Those booths where they sell tickets are not soundproof. The people in those booths, upon hearing they have been one-upped, will not simply go, "Aw shucks, those crazy kids." My friend and I were then brought back outside and graciously allowed to buy some PG-13 tickets to another movie. I do not even remember which. We also had a guy escort us directly to the theater for that movie, so that we did not try to sneak in, which is really what we should have done in the first place. I really was not good at being deceptive. Story 25. Federal civil rights case involving state-level weapons violations. Very winnable case. Good evidence of police misconduct, civil rights violations, unlawful seizure. Set the kid up to be a misguided but kind-hearted kid, somewhere on the spectrum. The kid's only offense was bad social skills that angered a cop, and the judge was buying it. We were one hearing away from victory, until the kid staged a break-in of his parents' house so that his girlfriend could steal his Xbox and sell it to afford a pregnancy test, and he could collect the insurance money because he thought his grandfather had homeowner's insurance for that. His rationale was that he loved his girlfriend and wanted a new Xbox. The Xbox 360 had just come out. In light of these new charges, we were basically done, and I withdrew from the case and stopped taking cases shortly after. Additional details. The client and the girlfriend were not intimate at the time because she was his manager at a sandwich shop and did not want to get in trouble. A client's grandfather was paying the legal bills and cut him off financially as a result of having the house ransacked for purposes of getting an Xbox. I think he lived out of his car for a while, then ended up moving in with his girlfriend after a few weeks, who had by then been fired from her job at the sandwich shop because she was arrested for committing a felony. Story 26. My lawyer told me a story about a guy he was representing. He did not say what for. Anyway, he said he had the case won, and all he had to do was go to the judge and present the case in which the cops screwed up multiple times on tape, which would cause the case to be thrown out. During this time, the guy would text his girlfriend of 7 years every time he left the lawyer's office, telling her he could not believe they were buying it, and that he was going to get away with it. Well, some trouble went down, and they broke up, and she forwarded all the texts to the court. His trial did not get thrown out after that, and the lawyer lost the case. Story 27. I am a detective. The defendant hired the worst defense attorney ever, whom he believed wholeheartedly would win his case by getting his taped confession thrown out because he was not informed of his rights. When you are called on the phone to come to the police station, told on tape that you are not under arrest and free to leave, explained where the exits are located, and following the interview, leave, and are not arrested until 13 days later, there is no amount of legal maneuvering that is going to convince a judge that the interview was custodial and rights notification applies. Regardless, we had a phone recording of him admitting to inappropriate conduct with a minor. Comment 1. We had 2 guest speakers together back in high school. A lawyer and a police officer. The lawyer told us, no matter how smart you think you are, and even if you did not do anything, do not answer questions without calling a lawyer. His presentation went on for another 20 to 30 minutes. Then the officer got up and carefully told us, no matter how smart you think you are, and even if you did not do anything, do not answer questions without calling a lawyer. Then he asked if we had any questions and sat back down. Story 28. The defendant chose to testify even though she had a conviction for theft by deception on her record. She proceeded to lie about the circumstances and said that it was all a misunderstanding. The prosecutor, on cross-examination, asked her if she was sure about all of that. She was. The prosecutor then handed her a statement that she had written and had her read it aloud to the jury. It was not all a misunderstanding. Watching the facial contortions as she pretended to be shocked by her own words was one of the highlights of my job. The jury deliberated for 11 minutes. Story 29. I had a client go behind my back and write a letter to the prosecutor in some incoherent attempt to turn state's evidence for something in exchange for leniency. To this day, I do not think either the prosecutor or myself knows what. Let us say that the letter he sent to said prosecutor was problematic for his current case. I had a client who voluntarily submitted to a DNA test, knowing full well it would put him on the hook for a collection of charges that included familial misconduct, and then acted incredibly surprised and upset when he was subsequently charged with a collection of crimes, including familial misconduct. I had a client who demanded to talk to the police because of a pre-existing relationship with some lieutenant or whatever, and sprinted into confessing to incriminating prior knowledge with barely any prodding. I almost slapped that one truly. There was certainly a highly symbolic hand-to-chest, restrain-yourself motion that might have accidentally made contact. I had a client who was completely convinced that he was destined to be together forever with a girl he had met when she was underage and had allegedly engaged in inappropriate conduct. Here's a fun twist. He was a youngish white guy just out of the military, and despite allegedly violating the restraining order over and over again with the most ridiculously incriminating stuff imaginable, we are talking mixtapes and love letters in a gift bag, people, he still somehow managed to get away with an incredibly lenient pretrial diversion. But that is just because I was such a good lawyer, obviously. I had a client who managed the once-in-a-quarter miracle of getting an affordable bail for a substance case, and then, I only discovered later, kept up with his staggering substance habit until he ended up getting arrested for a serious harm charge. That is really just a more extreme example of the most common way that my clients harmed themselves. Substances. Most of the time, though, the clients do the stuff that ruins their case before you ever meet them for the first time. As a defense attorney, that is a mixed blessing from the standpoint of maintaining your own sanity. Story 30. My uncle was a public defender for juvenile offenders. He says that a young offender's worst enemy is his own parents. He seems to have seen many a case that was ruined or even dead on arrival because of something the parents did. An example was some kid who, with his buddies, was doing something shady, and they ended up accidentally causing a person's death in the process. I think it was a hit and run or something like that. The kid gets home, but his dad knew he was up to something no good. So he brings the kid to the cops to set things right. Makes him talk without a lawyer. The kid admits to whatever less serious stuff he was doing but says nothing about causing a person's death. Later, the dad finds out that the kid lied. So he takes his kid to the cops again to tell the real story, without a lawyer. Apparently, the dad thought he could use the police just as a way to discipline his kid. Admit to wrongdoing, say you are sorry, scare him straight, then be let go because he is only a kid, of course, by handing the police a complete confession to serious crimes, and not only that, but evidence of being untrustworthy due to the two conflicting confessions, which apparently counts against leniency. He ensured that his boy got locked up for a very long time.